Hello again, this is Karen Shell with your second lecture from your agenda, dated 1/17/23. We'll continue with this lecture and hopefully you'll keep learning more about sleep as we go along. As indicated on your agenda, we're going to cover the biology of sleep. And in this time, we're going to explain the anatomical structures related to sleep and explain the physiological pathways associated with sleep. As we get started today, we're going to start with the anatomical structures related to sleep. As indicated on this slide, we're going to talk about the structures related to sleep through the brain anatomy. I've listed and shown a picture of the brain, and we're going to go through each of these a little bit just to explain their function, and then later on we'll talk about how they relate to sleep in upcoming weeks. But I want you to be familiar with each of these terms and where they're at in the brain, and possibly how they affect sleep will help you understand the process better. The next 3 slides will cover the brain anatomy and some of the functions related to the brain. The first one listed here is the spinal cord, and we know it has sensory tracts that ascend down the spinal cord from the body to the body from the brain. These tracts are responsible for carrying information to the thalamus. The tissues carry to touch, temperature, and pain messages from the body back to the brain. The next one we have listed is the cerebrum. It's the principal and most anterior part of the brain, and it's located in the front area of the skull, consisting of 2 hemispheres, left and right. It's responsible for complex sensory and neural functions and the initiation and coordination of voluntary activity in the body. The next one is the thalamus. It's a large mass of gray matter located in the dorsal part of the forebrain, or the division of the forebrain. The fibers reach out to the thalamus to the cerebral cortex in all directions, and it's like a hub-like exchange of information. It has several functions, including relay of sensory signals, including motor signals to the cerebral cortex. And the hypothalamus is next, and the hypothalamus is part of the brain that contains a number of nuclei that with various function, and one of the most important function is the link to the nervous system, to the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is located below the thalamus and is part of the lymphatic system. A little more information about parts of the brain. You can read through this, but the ones I really want to point out here is the pituitary gland, where it's a small oval-shaped gland. It's behind your nose near the underside of your brain, and is attached to the hypothalamus. It's a stalk-like structure. The inner brain is the go-between. It's between the right and left brain, but it also has been known as the tween brain in older literature. It consists of structures that either on either side of the third ventricle, and it is including the thalamus, hypothalamus, and so on. Cerebellum is the little brain. Its a major function is the feature of the hindbrain of all vertebrates. The cerebellum plays an important role in motor control. And then we have the hypothalamus gland. It's a small area in the center of the brain, and it's essential for many body functions, from growth and development to mood and health, heart health. Again, some different terms that you need to be familiar with as we proceed through the class. They will be differently involved with sleep. So we have the brainstem. The brainstem is a stalk-like part of the brain that connects the cerebrum and the spinal cord. It's composed of midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. And the midbrain allows you to have balance and coordination in your movement. It's between the forebrain and the hindbrain, and is the center for your visual and auditory reflexes. Pons aids in the vital function of the brain by transmitting signals between the forebrain and the cerebellum. And the medulla oblongata is a continuation of the spinal cord within the skull, forming the lowest part of the brain stem and containing control centers for the heart and lungs. Well, the first 5 minutes of the brain anatomy was a lot to soak in, I know. But again, that's just a quick introduction to the brain anatomy. And as we get further into sleep, we'll probably bring some of those terms back up. So it's helpful for you to be familiar with them and also know where they're located in the brain. The next part I want to cover is the oral cavity. Because of the oral cavity is important for us during sleep, including obstruction to the airway. So again, be familiar with these different items that are listed. And I also included a quick diagram of a normal oral cavity. We'll be talking later on about abnormal cavity, how it can affect sleep. Okay, let's talk a little bit about oral anatomy. We have the top and bottom lip. They're a fleshy tissue that connects the front of the area of the cheeks. They are used in the human body for facilitating speech. They keep food between the teeth, and it also and guiding through the mouth. The lips are able for suckling when infancy, and they're very sensitive and have numerous receptors on their surfaces to help determine temperature, especially and texture of food. Then we have the hard and the soft palate. The palate is divided into two parts, the hard and the soft palate. The hard part is a solid, immovable roof of the mouth and attaches the teeth and gums, forming an arch. The soft palate is located behind the hard palate, and it is toward the back of the throat, and it's flexible area of the mouth where gag reflexes occur. Then we have the oral pharynx. That's part of the pharynx that lies between the soft palate and the hyoid bone. The right tonsil and left tonsils are a couple of lymphoid organs. They're present in the tract. They consist of the adenoid tonsil, two tubal tonsils, and two palatine tonsils, and the lingual tonsil. These organs play an important role in the immune system. And then we have the tongue. It's a fleshy muscular organ in the mouth. It's used for tasting, licking, and swallowing. Why are these important during sleep? We can have an obstruction to sleep anywhere in the tract to the airway. So it's kind of important to know where the obstruction occurs and why it occurs, and this will give us a general idea of how it occurs in the oral cavity. The next diagram on this slide is the trachea and the lungs and the components of each. Again, obstruction to airflow can occur in any of these areas, so it's important to know where they're located and what their functions are. Okay, let's do a quick review of the different parts of the trachea and the lungs. And again, we want to know where these are located so that when we talk about different forms of sleep apnea, where the reduction of airflow occurs. So quickly, we'll go over these terms. We have the larynx. It's the hollow muscular organ that forms the air passages to the lungs and includes the vocal cords and voice box. The tracheal cartilages in the trachea or in the windpipe are tracheal rings. The tracheal rings have cartilages, and the cartilage is strong but flexible. It holds the airway open. This tracheal cartilage can support the trachea, which allows the movement of the flow of air in and out. We have the right and left lung. Both lungs are part of the respiratory system. They're soft, elastic, spongy tissues that participate in gas exchange lower down in the bronchial tree. We have the carina. The carina is where the trachea divides into the two lungs, the left and right main stem bronchi. It separates basically air movement into both sides of the lungs. Right and left bronchus is the difference between, I guess one goes into the right lung and one goes into the left lung. And the difference between right and left is the right is shorter and has a wider angle, and the left is longer and narrower. and also the right bronchus is more vertical than the left. Then we get into bifurcation of the trachea. The trachea is the division of the trachea into the right and left bronchi, and it occurs at the 5th or 6th level of the thorax, and it's rigid-like as well between the diverging bronchi. And then we get to the air exchange and the bronchioles. They're smaller branchioles of the bronchial airways, and they include the terminal bronchioles and the respiratory bronchioles, where the start of, delivering of air to the alveoli so that gas exchange can occur. Before we go any further, there's probably the next 6 slides or so are going to cover some important terms in the biology of sleep. I think it's important for you to be familiar with these terms as we go through the semester, because we're going to bring them out and revisit them on how they affect sleep during some of the courses we're taking. So as we get started, the first one I have listed is the pineal gland, and that's the function for the control and development of sexual traits. Melatonin is another big one. Melatonin is a hormone that's produced by the pineal gland and is involved in regulating sleeping and waking cycle, among other things. Adenosine, it's a sleep-inducing. It releases neurons that are involved in metabolic functions, and adenosine is also involved in the process of sleep, particularly in the control and start of sleep. The next one I have listed is just prior to going to sleep. It's called awake but relaxed. Also have listed circadian rhythms. This is the 24-hour cycle, and it's unique per individual. It includes sleep and wakefulness. We'll talk about some of that during sleep that happens with your temperature and everything like that later. Suprachiasmatic nucleus and the light is a small region of the nucleus. The nucleus is a small region of the hypothalamus, the gland that's found in the brain, and it's very small. It interacts with other areas of the brain and controls circadian rhythm through the secretion of several body and brain chemicals, such as peptides and neurotransmitters. Sleep through a polysomnograph includes awake and alert. These are beta waves. We'll show the difference between the different wavelength frequencies once we get into interpreting sleep tests. Sleep stages include sleep, theta waves, hallucinations, hypnagogic sensation, and sleep 5 minutes, usually an onset of 5 minutes. That's sleep stage 1. A lot of times our patients either spend a really long time in stage 1 because they can't fall asleep, which is abnormal. Should be out of stage 1 within 5 minutes. Others can go right into REM sleep and skip stages with different disorders of sleep. And we'll again go into those a little bit more in detail as we go through scoring a sleep test and what's normal and abnormal. Hypnagogic sensations are sensations of falling or floating, and sometimes they're incorporated into our memories. Again, we'll talk about those when they happen during sleep. You may have had an episode of that. We can explain those a little bit later. Stage 2 sleep is a little deeper sleep. It has a periodic appearance as sleep spindles, and they're very identifiable when you look at the polysomnograph. Sleep talking occurs in this stage. So it's usually within the first period of sleep within the first 20 minutes and last 20 minutes. So 5 minutes of stage 1, and then you go into different stages of sleep progressively, with stage 2 lasting 20 minutes. Again, we can see in some of the testing that people get into stage 2 and never proceed to the deeper sleep because of their sleep disorders. So we'll talk about that again. They're usually theta waves mixed in with the K complexes or sleep spindles. Sleep spindles are a rapid burst of the brainwave activity. Stage 3 is a transitional stage into stage 4. Delta waves occur, slow wave sleep. It occurs only a few minutes to a deep sleep. So again, when we get in definition of our night of sleep, what's normal and abnormal, we'll look at the different ways. Stage 4 sleep occurs into a deep sleep. We used to differentiate between stage 4 and 3, but we call it now a delta wave, slow wave sleep. Bedwetting can occur, sleepwalking can occur. It can last up to 30 minutes, and as we progress deeper into deeper sleep, it's just before we get into REM sleep, if sleep is normal. Stage 5 or REM sleep occurs. This is again, the heart rate changes, breathing becomes irregular, rapid eye movement, and they become muscle tension, so that they don't move around. Again, we'll talk about how that happens when we get into the more normal and abnormal sleeps. And also the genitals become aroused during stage 5. Talk a little bit about REM sleep. It's rapid eye movement, aka paradoxal sleep. Can be called REM or paradoxal. It's a reoccurring sleep stage during which vivid dreams commonly occur in humans, and it's that paradoxal sleep. We go into REM several times during the night, following the staging of sleep. As with the night progresses, the REM periods get longer. We know that sleep benefits help in memory consolidation. We know that concentration improves, mood improves, moderate hunger, it reduces up obesity, and improves the immune system. Insomnia is a recurring problem of or failing to stay asleep. Okay, this is the last slide I have on some common terms of sleep. I probably have about 6 more pages we can get into. We'll talk about those as we move along through the semester, but I wanted to make sure you had these on, you're familiar with, because we're going to be talking about them rather quickly. Narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by uncontrollable sleep attacks. It's pretty interesting, and we will go into depth on that. Sleep apnea is a sleep disorder where temporary cessation of breathing occurs during a sleep and is repeated with momentary awakenings, which patients often don't remember that they woke up. It can occur during different stages of sleep. We have obstructive sleep apnea and central sleep apnea, and we'll differentiate the two and how we test for each and how we treat for each. And then sleep terrors. Sleep terrors happens during stage 4. It's characterized by episode in which sleep wake up is suddenly and extreme in arousal and panic. Again, most people that have sleep terrors, sometimes the observer that's watching them is frightened by what happens during a sleep terror, and a lot of times the individual doesn't recall having them when they wake in the morning. Okay, now we get into the second outcome for this lecture for the 17th of January, to explain the physiological pathways associated with sleep. I know the first half of this lecture was a little long and possibly boring, but we really needed to get a handle on our own knowledge of the different definitions and terms so that we can make this part of the lecture more meaningful. So good job hanging in there. We'll continue on. As we get started with this section, I want to take a moment just to describe a couple different, I guess, extra terms that we'll be referring to. One of them is sleep architecture, and all of us have the inherent architecture that sleep is supposed to bring onto us. And basically, in normal sleep architecture, there's a pattern of sleep, and that pattern exists of 2 different main types of sleep, and they include the REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, or non-rapid eye movement sleep, which contains the 1, 2, 3, and 4 sleep. So the non-REM sleep has 3 different stages. They're all feature different depths of sleep and can be identified through the brain waves, polysomnogram, eye movements, and muscle tone. I've included in this slide a I guess, a graph, a diagram, or whatever you want to call it, histogram of sleep architecture in a normal night of sleep. And you can see that we go through the various stages of sleep throughout the night. And as we progress into REM, our REM gets a little longer each time that we go into REM. And this is a kind of a period of time, over time, what stages of sleep we're in and how we get to REM. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the different disorders, and these graphs can look very different from that, but this is what a normal sleep architecture should look like depending on the individual and how many hours they sleep. This slide just depicts that graph a little bit clearer. You can see the different cycles of sleep. There's 5 listed in here during an 8-hour sleep. Our first cycle goes into 1, 2, 3, 2, then to REM. Second cycle usually starts at 2, stage 2, 3, and 2, and back to REM. And then the third cycle you can wake briefly and go 1, 2, 3, 2 back to REM. With the fourth cycle into 1, 2, waken briefly, and then fifth cycle is 1, 2, REM, and then 2 again. A lot of times we wake up in the morning and we remember our dream. First thing, it's probably because you were still in REM while you were dreaming. And so that particular dream stays with you a little bit, and you can sometimes remember it. So REM is kind of a stage in where that deep sleep occurs, the body regenerates, the brain works harder, our heart rate goes up, and dreams occur. So now we're going to cover the 2 types of sleep, both REM and non-REM sleep. We know that REM and non-REM sleep alternate, and the alterations between non-REM and REM is really not fully understood. There's irregular cycling or absent sleep stages are associated with sleep disorders. First, we're going to talk about REM itself, rapid eye movement sleep. You may have noticed in your bed partner or animals even the rapid eye movement when they're asleep. That is an indication that they're in the deep sleep. It's a low voltage, mixed frequency brain wave activity with muscle atonia, bursts of rapid eye movements. You'll notice that on the polysomnogram that it's pretty identifiable by comparing the actual brain waves with the eye movement and the muscle tone on the recording. In REM, we often see sawtooth waveforms. That's called theta activity. There's also alpha activity, which is a smaller wave. We see REM period last 1 to 5 minutes, and it progresses in length during the different phases of sleep throughout the night as the sleep episode progresses. There's loss of muscle tone and reflexes, and 80% of the vivid dream recall results from this stage of sleep. We know that REM is important for memory consolidation. A lot of times we see when you've stayed up for a long amount of time, we can see REM rebound, in which REM gets, you start off in REM earlier, it lasts longer. A lot of times it just is there to make up for the sleep you missed previously. So sometimes that REM rebound takes effect. Next, we're going to cover the 4 stages of non-REM and the slow wave sleep. These are also associated with distinct activity and physiology. We'll kind of go into those a little bit this week, but probably get into them deeper as we move through the semester. We use the EEG tracing to show these characteristics and changes of the stages, and you'll be able to score them through the night on how much sleep is in each stage. The next stage of non-REM sleep that we're going to talk about is stage 1. And again, it's the transitional role in the sleep stage cycling. It is from wake to the first stage of non-REM. Typically, it lasts up to 1 to 7 minutes on the initial cycle, the first cycle. It can be 2 to 5% of your total sleep, and it's again the transition from wakefulness. So the EEG shows rhythmic noise to low voltage mixed frequency waves, and it usually, like I said, is the first stage of sleep, and it's very short. The next stage of non-REM we'll talk about is stage 2. We know it lasts 10 to 25 minutes in the first initial cycle. Again, it lengthens with each successive cycle. So it composes about 45 to 55% of the total sleep episode. It can require more intense stimulus to be awake from stage 2. And the activity on the EEG is low voltage, mixed frequency, and has the presence of K complexes. Also, it's hypothesized that this stage of sleep, the sleep spindles are important in memory consolidation. And a person learning a new task can have higher incidence of density of sleep spindles than those with the control group. Stages 3 and 4, or slow wave sleep, they're collectively 3 and 4 are collectively referred to as slow wave sleep. We used to differentiate between 3 and 4 when we were doing scoring, but they consolidated that scoring method to make it we just score slow wave sleep. It occurs during the first third of the night. It has a very distinct characters. It has increased show in the EEG shows higher voltage, slow wave activity. The arousal threshold is the highest for all the non-REM stages in stage 4. And the stage lasts only a few minutes and constitutes 3 to 8% of sleep, total sleep. Next, we're going to talk about, in the next few slides, about the physiological pathways associated with sleep. Physiological and how sleep patterns change over the individual's lifespan. The sleep-wake system is thought to be regulated by the interplay of 2 major processes, one that promotes sleep and one that promotes or maintains wakefulness. Humans spend about 1/3 of their lives asleep, yet most individuals know little about sleep. Sleep is a universal need of all higher life forms, including humans, absent of which has serious physiological consequences. And we're going to cover some of those specifically with certain parts of the body, and give you a little more in-depth detail what happens to them if you're deprived of sleep. Body system changes that occur during sleep, and we'll talk about normal sleep right now. It's well tolerated in healthy individuals. It may compromise some of the fragile balance of individuals with vulnerable systems, such as heart disease, diabetes, obesity, endocrine conditions. Those things can affect how your body reacts or changes during sleep. If those things are present, then physiological changes also can occur. Okay, in the next couple of slides, we're going to take a look at the physiological pathways associated with sleep. We're going to look at the process between REM and non-REM, the differences. Let's look at brain activity. We know that in non-REM, it decreases from wakefulness. And in REM, it increases in motor and sensory areas, while other areas are similar to non-REM. Heart rate. The heart rate in non-REM slows from wakefulness, but increases and varies compared to REM in non-REM in REM. Blood pressure. We know in non-REM it decreases from wakefulness, but increases up to 30% higher and varies from non-REM. Sympathetic nerve activity decreases from wakefulness, but in non-REM, but in REM it increases significantly from wakefulness. And muscle tone. it's in non-REM is similar to wakefulness, but in REM it's absent. Okay, let's look at blood flow to the brain. In non-REM, it decreases from wakefulness, but in REM, increases from non-REM, and depending on the brain region, how much. Respiration. Respiration decreases from wakefulness, but increases and varies from non-REM in REM, but they show brief stoppages or cough suppressed. Airway resistance. In non-REM, increases from wakefulness, but in REM increases and varies from wakefulness. Body temperature is regulated in non-REM at a lower set point than wakefulness, but in REM, shivering initiation at lower temperature than during wakefulness, and not regulated or no shivering temperature drifts towards that of a local environment. And then sexual arousal in non-REM occurs infrequently and is greater in REM, greater than non-REM in REM. Okay, in the next few slides, we'll dig in a little bit deeper into the physiological pathways associated with sleep through the different pathways of the body. Okay, let's look a little more specifically into each individual pathway. Let's start with the cardiovascular. The autonomic nervous system activity causes the primary changes in blood pressure, heart rate that occur during sleep. Increased blood pressure, heart rate occur with the K complexes, arousals, and large body movements. There's an increase of myocardial infarction in the morning to the increase in heart rate and blood pressure that accompany waking. Okay, let's take a look next at the sympathetic nerve activity. We know that the sympathetic nerve activity decreases in non-REM sleep, but there is a burst of sympathetic nerve activity during non-REM sleep due to a brief increase in blood pressure and heart rate that follows the K complexes. Remember that non-REM sleep includes stage 1, 2, 3, and slow wave, and K complexes are in stage 2. During the respiratory pathway, we know that ventilation and respiratory flow change and become increasingly faster and more erratic, specifically during REM sleep. And we can notice that without a polysomnogram, and we can see that in our bed partners at times when they're in REM sleep. So REM sleep suggests hypoventilation, but it can also occur in non-REM sleep. Factors that contribute to changes in respiratory ventilation and flow can be due to some of the anatomy that we covered at the beginning of the slideshow, or it can be to several things like a lower pharyngeal muscle tone, a reduced rib cage movement, increased upper airway resistance, cough reflex that's suppressed, hypoxic ventilatory response is also lower, and arousal response to respiratory resistance is the lowest. Cerebral blood flow can also be affected. In non-REM sleep, it's reduced, has reduced blood flow and metabolism. Metabolism and blood flow increase in some brain regions during REM compared to wakefulness. The pathway in the renal during the sleep for the renal pathway is that we notice a decrease in excretion of sodium, potassium chloride, and calcium during sleep and renal function. We see changes in the renal blood flow during sleep that are complex, involving the glomerular filtration, hormone secretion, sympathetic nerve stimulation. We also see that there's a reduced renal flow during sleep, a decreased urine renal flow, and it's more concentrated because of these changes. see, growth hormone secretion usually occurs the first few hours after sleep onset, and then the thyroid hormone secretion takes place late in the evening. Melatonin, which induces sleepiness, is likely to be reduced from this, and also it's influenced by the light-dark cycle and suppressed by lights. So the endocrine system is complex and also affects how we fall asleep and how long we stay asleep and why we fall asleep. I'll talk a little about sleep-wake regulation now. Process S promotes sleep. Process C maintains wakefulness. We know that these two processes promote sleep and maintain wakefulness, and the need for sleep is accumulates across the days and peaks just before bedtime at night and dissipates throughout the night as we get sleep. So let's first talk about processes. Process C is the waking, is wake, promoting and regulating, is regulated by circadian rhythm. It builds throughout the day, and it serves to counteract the process S and promote wakefulness and alertness. It's serving to enhance sleep consolidation, and the need for sleep dissipates across the night. So with the adequate night's rest, homeostasis drive for sleep is reduced, and the circadian rhythm waking drives begin to increase, and the cycle starts over again. In in the absence of process C, total sleep time remains the same, but it's randomly distributed over the day and night. Therefore, the process also works to consolidate sleep and wake in a fairly distinct episode. Now, process S is the process to drive sleep, accumulates throughout the day. It peaks just before bedtime at night and dissipates throughout the night. Sleep process S is regulated by neurons that shut down the arousal systems, thus allowing the brain to fall asleep. Many of these neurons are found in the hypothalamus, and these neurons contain molecules that inhibit the neural communication and turn off the arousal systems during sleep. Loss of these nerve cells causes a profound insomnia, and inputs from other regions of the brain also greatly influence the sleep system. These include inputs from the lower brainstem that relay information about the state of the body. Example would be a full stomach is conductive to falling asleep, as well as an emotional and cognitive areas of the forebrain. In addition, there are inputs from the circadian system that allow the wake-sleep system to synchronize with the external day-night cycle, but it also overrides the cycle when necessitated by the environmental needs such as light. This sleep-generating system includes neurons in the pons that intermittently switch from non-REM to REM over the course of the night, and these neurons send outputs to the lower brainstem and spinal cords that cause the muscles to relax. In REM sleep, chaotic and autonomic activity is characterized by the REM sleep, and other outputs are sent to the forebrain, including activation of the cholinergic pathways to the thalamus to activate the EEG. Hope that makes sense. We'll go through it again as we go through this. So let's review slightly and think of the sleep-wake regulation. We have the sleep-generating systems in the brainstem. We talked about the hypothalamus and the lower brainstem, the emotional and cognitive area of the forebrain, the neurons in the pons, the spinal cord that causes muscle atonia, and the forebrain. The sleep-wake regulation. So the wake generation systems of the brainstem provide wakefulness being generated by ascending arousal system from the brainstem that activates the forebrain structure to maintain wakefulness. Two major pathways that originate in the upper brainstem, the first pathway being the upper pons and the second pathway being the upper brainstem. This inputs traverse the basal forebrain through the cerebral inputs traverse or travel through the basal forebrain through the cerebral cortex. Circadian rhythms, the 24-hour clock. This is the 24-hour clock that we talked about, and it has molecular mechanisms that underlie that activity of that circadian clock. The genes rhythmically expressed contribute to the main aspects of the cellular function, including the glucose and lipid metabolism, signal transduction, secretion, oxidative metabolism, and others, suggesting that the importance of the circadian system in many central aspects of life. Probably many of you have experienced a change in your clock, especially I think change in shift work has affected all of us. I know from working in a sleep lab and opening a sleep lab and also having to run the department during the day, it really messed up my clock because certain times of the day my body temperature would drop. I would feel nauseated and sick because I had messed up my clocking, and then I could never get enough sleep because of my job, and so I didn't get that restful sleep. So I think this paying attention to your circadian clock is important, and understanding, you know, your body's trying to tell you to go to sleep, you should go to sleep, and that kind of thing. Example for me was that when I had to train people in the sleep lab and work during the day, I didn't get much sleep, and always I could tell at 3 o'clock my body temperature would drop and I would be freezing to death at that point in time. I always knew it was coming, so I'd always get a hot cup of tea or something because it was coming. And then another thing, I would feel nauseated during the night when I had to stay up. So I learned to eat something at 10 o'clock so that I wouldn't feel nauseated by 2 o'clock. So I think just paying attention to your body really pays off. And when you start to mess with the circadian rhythm to get it back in the order, takes a little bit of effort. One of the other things when I travel across seas, you know, that really messes up the clock as far as if I'm traveling east or west, and you know, they call it jet lag, or they call it sleep deprivation. When you change your clock, it takes you a couple days to reset it for that area. So our body's pretty good about it, but we have to pay attention to it. Let's talk a little bit about the suprachiasmatic, which I can never say right, nucleus. It's responsible for regulating the circadian rhythms in all of our organs. It receives direct inputs from the class of nerves in the retina that act as brightness detectors and which can reset the clock genes on a daily basis. Circadian suprachiasmatic nucleus transmits to the rest of the brain and body signals that bring all the daily cycles in synchrony and with the external day-night cycle. So we can talk a little later when we talk about treatment about light therapy and how we can control light to help us with our sleep cycle and to put our circadian rhythm back into its regular rhythm. So I think it's important to, again, pay attention to that and do everything you can to get your rhythm back to normal. So a lot of night shift workers use night stimulus in the middle of the light stimulus in the middle of the night, so that when they do go to bed, they've had that light stimulus. You know, a lot of people at night turn down the lights at work night, turn down the lights, but really the bright light is necessary for your rhythm to get set. We'll talk about that when we do talk about treatment. So let's talk a little bit about sleep and thermoregulation. I kind of mentioned it in one of the slides before about how I could figure it out with my own body when my temperature dropped. Body temperature regulation is subject to the circadian system influence. So sleep, wake can influence your body temperature. How much sleep you get affects it. Body temperature is higher during the day than at night. And at night, there's a gradual decline in body temperature, a decrease in heat production, and an increase in heat loss. It promotes sleep onset and maintenance, and conversely, there's a gradual increase in body temperature several hours before waking to get you ready to wake up. Again, this is something that you may be aware of as you stay up all night, that if your sleep gets disrupted. As we come to the end of this presentation, and I have to admit, I'm a little bit sleep deprived right now. I probably should have done this presentation early morning instead of late at night for you, but I think it's important to realize that sleep is a process that is necessary for normal physiologic, mental, and emotional functions during the waking hours. And I attest that my brain is a little bit fried tonight after this lecture because of all the complexity of sleep that we covered. Don't be worried. We'll go over most of this again as we proceed through the semester. So hopefully you'll understand it more. This will just give you an introduction to it, this presentation. We know that in the development of the central nervous system, sleep is the foundation for the development of normal alertness, attention, and productive wakefulness. Sleep is necessary for healing and recovery state. And if sleep is abnormal, the consequences can be physiological and physical illness, or even death. Treatment of sleep disorders improve the physical well-being and can be instrumental in the treatment of medical and psychiatric disease. So I think we know a lot more about sleep than when I started many years ago in the development of the sleep lab, and it's ever changing as we move forward with more research. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's always more to learn, and we'll keep learning as we go through this semester, and hopefully maybe one of you will be interested in sleep in the future and help with the research to find better ways to get the rest we need. I've included some of the references I used for the preparation of this presentation. Here, I have more in future presentations that will be helpful if you want to read more about it. Always look for it at the end of the presentation. I'll list those references. Additionally, I have a quiz on the next slide for you to just a quick, simple quiz for you to review over some of the information that was covered in this presentation. This was probably a difficult for you to absorb all the information from this presentation, but again, it'll give you an introduction to how complex sleep is, and hopefully as we move through the semester we'll apply what have been on these first two presentations and bring them back into our the next presentation, so they'll be more easily absorbed and hopefully remembered. I enjoyed doing this presentation, and I look forward to our next one, which I think covers, let me look real quick, normal sleep in humans. We actually get into some of the fine print, and I believe that I get to join you in class live in one of the classes coming up on the 23rd. So we'll see you then. Thank you for your attention, and good luck. Get some good night's sleep before I see you again.